At the South Carolina Department of Archives and History, State Historic Preservation Office. He wears many hats there. One of them is the supervisor of the National Register of Historic Places. He's also co-manager of the survey, the statewide survey of historic properties. And today we'll be talking to you about one of his other roles, that is the certified local government administrator of that program. And it's going to be a very informative and impactful lecture. So thank you everybody for coming. And without any further ado, Bradley Sauls.
Chris, Andy, I appreciate everybody coming out tonight, especially when it's cold out. You can be at home under a blanket, so I appreciate you coming out here instead. I'll try to get you home quick enough so you can get on the couch under the blanket if you don't want to. I'm Brad Sauls. I do wear a lot of hats for the State Historic Preservation Office. We're a part of the South Carolina Department of Archives and History. Agency's been around for a long time, but the State Historic Preservation Office, or the SHPO, we've been around since the late 60s. There are 11 of us on staff, including myself and Chris and others, and we deal with a lot of programs. I'm going to talk a little bit about several of our programs as they all sort of overlap, because they all kind of overlap with the local government preservation and other issues. So the main focus will be about what local governments can do in terms of preservation, but I will kind of meander through a few different programs. Hopefully they'll be all tied together. But the main thing that we do at the State Historic Preservation Office, our primary program is the National Register of Historic Places. That's sort of the hub of the wheel. Everything that we do sort of branches off from that. The National Register, if you don't know, was created by Act of Congress 1966, part of the National Historic Preservation Act. And the National Register is managed by the National Park Service primarily, and also at the state level by the State Historic Preservation Offices. All the 50 states and some of the territories have preservation offices, and they're located in different parts of state government. In South Carolina, we're part of the State Department of Archives and History. And the National Register of Historic Places is the nation's official list of historic places that are worthy of preservation. And that word worthy is carrying a lot of weight there. Because it's not mandating preservation, it's not requiring preservation, it's saying that places are worthy of preservation, and it's leaving the actual mechanics of preservation to others. And the National Register is helping to facilitate preservation, but we can't require it or mandate it. So again, the National Register, what it doesn't do is it does not prevent demolition of historic properties. This is an example of property that was listed on the National Register. It was built in the 1890s, listed in the National Register in 1979. And then there was a proposal to develop the property without the house on it. And so it was proposed to relocate the property, but that was going to require some rezoning to do that. Neighbors weren't happy about it, so they did get their rezoning request, and the owner said, well, I got to build my new project here. So the house was demolished in 2002. So again, this house was listed in the National Register, but that National Register listing is not enough by itself to prevent it being replaced by encroachment. So that's been there since 2002 or 3. I just looked this week, noticed on Google Maps Street View, just to kind of see what's happened to it since then. The building's still there, but it appears to have been vacant about spring of 21 until last fall, at least. I don't know about right now. At least for about a 4-year period there, it sat vacant. So just rub a little more salt in the preservationist wound there. But what is replaced, this grand house, is now sitting there empty, not being utilized. Another thing the National Register doesn't do is does not prevent inappropriate design choices. Hopefully it's fairly obvious what the inappropriate design choices might be here, but again, this is a late 19th, early 20th century house in a historic part of an unnamed town in South Carolina. But if it was listed on the National Register, what's been done to it would not prevent that. So again, how does National Register listing preserve a property? Again, listing by itself doesn't preserve a property. Primarily, really, it falls on owners of historic properties. They're the ones ultimately really going to make a decision about whether property is going to happen to use or be preserved or continue to be part of the community and be part of the significance of the community. And the National Register does provide incentives to help owners to preserve properties, such as things as tax incentives and grants. But that's the carrot, but not the stick. But local governments can have a role to play in preservation, to kind of go beyond what the National Register can do. So local government preservation tools, among other things, can be local historic designation, which is a different designation than the National Register of Historic Places. Can have preservation overlay zoning and architectural review and design guidelines. So as part of local government's planning and zoning abilities, if they choose to use them, that can be part of what helps provide protection and guidance on appropriate rehab and repair of historic properties. So what are we protecting with these tools? Do we have National Register listed properties in our community? Are there districts of historic commercial buildings or historic residential buildings? How do we know what we have? Is there something to preserve? Do we have anything that we want to use any of these local government tools to preserve? How do we know that? Well, we know here in Cayce, we've got at least, there are 4 properties that are individually listed in the National Register. Some going back to the earliest days of the program, all the way up until last year. The professional building on Knox Abbott Drive, and that is a late 20th century commercial building, and there's what was driving that National Register nomination is the hopes of potentially using tax credits to rehabilitate it. And it's the tax program that Chris works with a lot that's been the biggest driver of new National Register nominations in South Carolina. Is people want to get properties listed so they can then use the available tax incentives to help rehab. Besides knowing what's listed in your community, conducting surveys to identify historic properties. We had a grant project with the city of Cayce in 2023 to identify some African American cemeteries in the city limits. So that was good to get those recorded and evaluated, get some baseline information on those, get that information in our GIS database so that that's available for compliance reviews and things, and for the general public to be more aware of and get these things reported and recognized. I was checking our records. We don't have really a whole lot of survey data for Cayce, so certainly encourage and recommend as something to consider that perhaps a future grant-funded citywide survey in Cayce would be a thing that would be helpful as part of an overall effort of trying to promote preservation and identify what do you have in Cayce to preserve. Those survey projects can be grant supported through our office. So how do we create, we're talking about National Register listings, whether it's individual properties or districts, they can only go so far in terms of preservation. So but locally designated historic districts through your local government can potentially do a bit more. So how do you create those? Local governments can enact a zoning ordinance that can, this language comes from the state enabling legislation. This is part of state code. It's part of the local government's planning and zoning powers given to them in state law. So you can protect historically and architecturally valuable districts by governing the right to erect, demolish, remove, or alter the exterior appearance of designated buildings and districts. You would create a board of architectural review to carry out the ordinance to implement these things. Board of architectural review is just really sort of the generic term. That's what's in the state legislation. You don't necessarily have to call your board by that name. They vary from place to place. Conway, it's a community appearance board. In other communities, it's Historic Properties Protection Commission. It's the Design Development Review Board. The names differ from place to place. They call it what they want to call it, but generically under the bigger umbrella, it would be a board of architecture review is what it is. That's how it's described in the state legislation, but you can give it a different name. Local historic preservation has the ability to, unlike the National Register, which again incentivizes, but the local designation, it can provide protection from the irreversible loss or alteration of historic properties. You've got that ability, if local governments choose to use it and implement it, to prevent the loss of historic properties or damage to them that can't be 100% once the damage is done, you can't reverse it. And local governments also use their preservation ordinances that can apply to what happens with new construction within historic districts. So it's not that you can't build new in historic districts, but you can put guidelines and controls in place that influence how new construction is designed so that it's respectful of its surrounding if you're doing new construction within the context of a historic district or neighborhood, whether that's a commercial or residential area. So that is one part of this whole sort of preservation tool package that local governments can avail themselves of. So again, a function of the SHPO, among other things, is to try to assist local preservation programs. So what is the Certified Local Government Program? That is part of the large sort of National Historic Preservation Act programs through the National Park Service and the state preservation offices. It's intended to be a partnership between the local governments, the state preservation offices, and the National Park Service to help. It's more formalizes an arrangement and partnership in terms of helping guidance and information and training at all three levels of government, national, state, and local, to primarily is intended to assist local governments with their preservation programs, training, and other guidance. So the Certified Local Government Program is a designation status that local governments, once they have established a historic preservation program, that they can apply through the SHPOs and through the National Park Service to get that Certified Local Government designation as sort of a stamp of approval, sort of a capstone accomplishment for their local preservation program. Again, it's just like the National Register. It's primarily a recognition program, but it also puts some benefits and responsibilities on the local governments and their programs. There are more than 2,000 such recognized governments surrounding the country. And we currently have 36 in South Carolina. And they range from not just Greenville, Columbia, Charleston, but small towns like Abbeville and Seneca, York, Somerville, Sullivan's Island, Cormac. We've got one county, Horry County, and the rest are towns and municipalities. Now, this program's been around since the 80s. Some of these programs have had their CLG designation since the early days in the 80s. Some got it in the 90s, some in the last 10 years or so. And just like a lot of things, they kind of come and go in waves in terms of the programs sort of change as the people change. And so, some that may have been on the front end of the program, some programs may have gotten dormant or nearly dormant, or the others are very active. So it runs the gamut, but we always try to encourage strong preservation programs, and we work with them, try to work with them through these sort of ebbs and flows as personalities change and priorities change. But so every one of these has met some minimums, but their experience and their effectiveness in their programs may vary a lot from place to place over time. So the requirements to be a certified local government is the local government has to establish and maintain a local preservation program, and that's primarily through adopting a preservation ordinance under the local government's planning and zoning functions that are allocated to them through the state comprehensive planning act. So you have to put the ordinance in place. You have to adopt a qualified board of architectural review, or whatever they happen to call it, to basically enforce that ordinance and review projects and properties and designations under that ordinance. And you have to maintain an inventory of historic properties. And the survey that I was talking about earlier, that's what you can do. The survey helps you create that inventory of properties that you want to then maintain and have information about properties to evaluate them, whether for National Register eligibility or for local designation, and just to understand what do you have, and then that should help the program be more effective if you know what it is you're trying to preserve and have a sense of what you have, what its potential significance is. And then finally, there has to be an avenue for public participation in that program. That's certainly a key part of it in terms of having board meetings open to the public and encouraging public input about their activities and proposals as far as projects they're reviewing, and having public input and communication about all that. It's something that should happen out in the opening just like everything else in government, you can have sunshine on. Again, the Certified Local Government Program, this is part of the state regulations that relate to the program, that it promotes community preservation planning and heritage education through partnership with our office. And through that partnership helps facilitate funding and technical assistance and training. We sometimes use our federal grant funds that come through our office to help facilitate those training activities to assist with specific preservation projects. The program requires that you do adopt a preservation ordinance that conforms to the state enabling legislation. So, in the ordinance, we can provide if, particularly for communities that are sort of starting from scratch, if they're considering this, you don't necessarily have to reinvent the wheel every time. We can, point you to other local governments of, similar size or place in the state, where they already have the programs, and we look at those ordinances. We have a sample ordinance that we provide that can be used, so we try to, that's another part of our sort of guidance and training is to help you not have to start from scratch for this, but to give you the sort of basic tools that you need to start up and get a program going. So the ordinance should have a clearly stated purpose, cite its authority in the state code, create a process for designating districts and landmarks, specify the jurisdiction of the design review board, where they, where are the properties that they're reviewing, establish the criteria and processes for review and approval, disapproval. Not even every local government chooses to review demolition. Sometimes they will only review alterations, but they might not review demolitions, or that they have to approve it. They can put a waiting period on it before they can actually carry it out, or some places can outright deny demolition. It's kind of up to the local government to decide within guidelines and guardrails of the state enabling legislation as to how you then apply that locally. You have procedures for enforcing decisions, and of course there's a right for applicants to appeal decisions. Your Board of Architecture Review, or Community Appearance Board, or Historic Properties Commission, whatever you decide to call it. In your ordinance, you want to set qualifications for them, and ideally have the council would appoint members to that board that have relevant professional and education backgrounds related to historic preservation and sort of related disciplines and activities. So you could have historians, architects, city planner, even archaeology, cultural anthropology, there's so many disciplines and professional areas that can overlap with preservation and have an interest in that. And certainly having attorneys, engineers, architects, real estate people involved. So there's a lot of different relevant disciplines that you can draw on from your community that can help inform the board's review activities. The board needs to meet as often as is needed to conduct their business and to avail themselves of training, just like any other planning commission, board of zoning appeals. They're required to have a certain amount of training each year. So to help with that for preservation boards, because it's hard to find a lot of preservation specific training, we do offer sessions at our annual historic preservation conference that members of local design review boards, they can count their attendance at some of those designated sessions as their training during the year. So that's part of our activities of trying to help support local design review boards. Maintaining an inventory and a survey of historic properties is a requirement of the COG program, and it's something where we invite the local governments to coordinate with us on recording. We can help provide methodology, scopes of work for how to do that, providing forms and how to collect data so that we get a copy of that information that helps inform our activities, and the local government has it for their activities as well. But maintaining that inventory, periodically updating it, and trying to have a sense of understanding what you have to apply this preservation ordinance to, and have that information be readily available to the public. Public participation is another key aspect to this, and again, that's primarily more about be ensured that like any other governmental body, that the board's activities are in the daylight, open to the public, information, documentation is available to the public, that you do everything in a public forum as far as decisions about applications. So what are the potential benefits of CLG status? Now, again, any local preservation program, it can wholly exist and function and be effective in preservation and be outside of the CLG program. It's not required that every local government that has a preservation program then become a certified local government. This is, I would see it as sort of a kind of capstone after you have sort of established a program, got it going. It is kind of a seal of approval on your program that you know it meets certain requirements. But some of the benefits of that, there is a little bit of grant funding available each year through the National Park Service, from the National Park Service through the state preservation offices available to the CLGs. We are required to award at least 10% of our annual allocation for CLG projects around the state. So that doesn't mean every CLG gets a grant every year. It's just that we have an open competitive application process every year, and CLGs are our first priority for funding. So as long as we meet our minimum, we will fund those projects, and if we're able to go as far as we can above that minimum, we'll do that, and also fund some other non-CLG projects as well. So for 2025, that minimum was $103,000. Any one project anywhere around the state could probably use that. We have to try to spread that out through around as many projects as we can to help as many different preservation projects as we can, and that money also has to be matched dollar for dollar. But those grant funds can be used to fund things like surveys, to do design guidelines for local preservation programs. We have funded new National Register nominations for districts. It can be used for projects on individual historic buildings. If you're doing a conditions assessment or a feasibility study, we've used the funding to help the certified local governments get the training that they need. Currently, this is starting our third year of funding memberships for all of our CLGs to be members of the National Alliance of Preservation Commissions, which is a national body of local preservation boards, local governments, and they have training opportunities each year. They have a national conference every 2 years, and they have access to more training, things that we can't always provide, but you can get some of those training opportunities through the NPC. So we use our funds to help pay for, so that every CLG just automatically has a free membership with an NPC and gets access to that without the cost. We also use our CLG grant funding. It's the only time we use our federal funding to do stabilization projects, sort of bricks and mortar or exterior weatherization repairs on buildings. We will award those directly to the local government for their projects, or CLGs can also designate third-party recipients. So like the city can be listed as the applicant on behalf of another third party, or particularly a nonprofit organization in their community who wants to apply for funding to do stabilization. So the photos show kind of before and after an example in Beaufort, Grass Shepherd House that had been really sort of vacant for several decades. Historic Beaufort got a long-term lease on the property, so we had a project where the city of Beaufort, as the CLG, they applied on behalf of Historic Beaufort, their preservation nonprofit. We were able to provide matching funds to help do some stabilization repairs to kind of get this building back into dry again and to stop the deterioration that was going on. Again, these funds are available on an annual application cycle. We're a little bit behind posting it for this year, so we're sort of waiting on uncertainties with the federal government to see how the funds are going to go. I'm probably going to get that up by first week or so of February now. Typically have a spring application cycle, deadline in the spring, usually around 1st of May, and get those projects awarded late summer, early fall. Projects that have about a year after that to be completed. And again, the CLGs are our first priority for funding, so that we meet our obligation on that, and then after we meet that obligation, we will fund as many non-COG projects as we can as well. Surveys are always a high priority for us, so even if a local government was not yet a COG but wanted to do a survey, we would certainly encourage them to apply for a grant to do a survey. That's always going to be a competitive type of application for us to fund. Again, other benefits, I think I've touched on some of these already, but there's that networking and training opportunities that are afforded COGs, particularly as we fund NAPC memberships and provide training opportunities at our conference every year. And then I'm just sort of basically on call to any local governments. They have questions about implementing their ordinance, or if they're looking to start a program, if they're having issues with their current program. We're kind of on call to try to help any way we can answer questions and provide sort of guidance, sort of counseling for their issues that they may be having. Some responsibilities of that. So there's the benefits to your program meets minimum requirements. You've maintained it. You've got it going. We can sort of put that stamp of approval on you. There's the potential benefit of the funding. But we do require to get an annual report from all the COGs to sort of give us our widget counting on how many applications you've reviewed, how many surveys have you done, have you made any changes to your ordinance, what sort of education have you had for your board members, that sort of thing, so that you're maintaining your program. And then we are required to also do periodic evaluations of the COGs to be sure they are meeting all those requirements. So last bit of advice on this topic, and then I'll be glad to take any questions about it. But what I would say to any community that doesn't, at that moment already have a preservation ordinance and program up and going, is that the community, through hopefully a public sort of discussion process, you got to decide as a community whether or not a preservation ordinance is a policy priority for your community. Is it something you want? Do you think you need it? Is there a need for it? Are the benefits worth pursuing that? And I would say to arrive at this decision independent of the potential benefits of the COG program. I'm always cautious about, don't want to oversell what the COG program can or can't do for local governments. And because creating a preservation ordinance, establishing a local government preservation program is a pretty big deal and is usually not non-controversial. So it's the kind of thing where there really needs to be a lot of open public discussion about it, and everybody sort of reaching consensus. This is something we want to do. We feel it's important. We've got things we want to protect. This is a good way to do it. So that's something that the community should decide. They want that independent of anything else. And I would say, so after if there's been consensus reached, we want to go down this road, we want to pursue this, then approach that COG status as a goal to pursue after you've gotten your program established and got your feet under you and got it going. Then to look to that as like, hey, we've got all these things in place and we want to have that status and we want to be a part of that program. But let public interest and support be the driver and make the case for why a preservation program would benefit the community. That's, in a nutshell, COG and local government preservation. So I'm happy to take any questions you might have. Karen.
I just, you may have said this already, but can a local government lose their COG status?
There is a mechanism to lose it.
Is that common or not?
It's not common, and we're going to work with every local government and give them every opportunity to keep it if they're having problems meeting requirements, or and it can happen where a local government may, after there's been turnover in time and different people, they may decide it's not a priority for them anymore. And if it wasn't, they don't want to be in it, and they can be excused, be sent on their way, and good luck. But once somebody's in, we try to keep them in and to provide all the resources that we can to do that, to keep them in the program. So we give everybody plenty of opportunities to work with them and to make improvements or to provide advice or guidance on that. But no, it is not a frequent thing that once you get your status and you lose it. We want to keep you in and do everything we can to make that happen. Yes.
If the survey grant program is competitive, are there any suggestions on how to be more considered for the grant money, especially if you're not a COGR?
Well, with every grant application we get, and we rate them all, again, the criteria that we use is we're looking at how well-planned the project is. Does the methodology make sense? Is the budget sensible for the scope of work? Is it going to use appropriate personnel? What is the potential public benefit of the project? What are the relative significance of the resources? So that applies to any project, whether it's a condition assessment for an individual building or for looking at doing a townwide or citywide survey. Surveys are always going to be competitive for us because it's one of our program areas. It's a priority for us, particularly if it's in areas where we've got little to no survey data historically. So I think a community that's demonstrating an interest in trying to understand what do they have to identify and evaluate the properties, and as long as they can, and we can help in terms of we'll review the application ahead of time. I will do that. I'll provide you with sort of sample scopes of work. We're happy to do everything we can to sort of help you through that process, to sort of give you the information that you can then give back to us along with your loan.
Give us some templates to work from.
Yeah, we can give you some sort of
yeah.
foundations for it, and you sort of add the local color to it, so to speak. But really, making a case for the need for the survey, that there's interest in having it, that there is sort of broad-based desire to have it, that you see some value in that information potentially, that you've got plans for. We look for applications come in, how are they part of a larger planning process? So surveys potentially can always be a strong thing to point out with those applications, is that we've got ideas, we've got plans for trying to promote and expand the preservation, make it a priority for our local government, and this is one of those sort of foundational steps to take. So surveys are going to always be competitive, and we want to fund those. So even if it's not a COG community, I would say we can provide the information to help get you started on an application, and we can review drafts. We're happy to work with you and try to cultivate those applications because they are a priority for us. Any other questions?
Well, we want to thank you for coming out tonight and your presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you.